I sat down and had a conversation with a very special guest, Darls Centola. Darls was a Jehovah's Witness and a very close friend to Michael Jackson. She's a licensed clinical social worker, educator, and EMDR consultant. This is her story. I have a very special guest on the show today, Darls Centola. And it came about that my previous video on Michael Jackson, and I spoke quite a bit about dolls on the episode. And lo and behold, she came across the video and reached out to me, which was quite surprising for me. So I am looking forward to our conversation, Dolls, about your life. And Dolls, just to put everybody in the picture, Dolls is the author of Finding Truth with Michael. And she's just released the book. Is that correct, Dolls?
Yes, it was released on April 7th.
April 7th. So it's fresh off the press, but we'll get into the book a little bit later.
Okay.
So thank you for joining me and welcome to the show. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Robin. It's so wonderful to be here. And what a surprise. I really came across your video by complete happenstance. I was looking on YouTube. I was actually looking for some late night clips because it was the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep. And then my YouTube suggested a video with you, and it was about Michael Jackson and Jehovah's Witnesses. And I thought, well, that's definitely something I'm interested in. And I clicked on it, and you were speaking about this girl named Dolls. And I thought, I wonder if he's talking about me. And then sure enough, you referenced a few things from LaToya Jackson's 1991 memoir where she spoke about me. And then I realized, yes, you were referencing me. So it was really a surprise. My heart was beating so fast. I just was really surprised.
Yeah. No, I'm glad we connected, and this is where we are today. So without further ado, so Dolls, before we traveled back into time, what does Dolls do today? What are your what do you do? What does your work look like? Could you explain that to us?
Yes, I am a licensed clinical social worker, which means that I am licensed in the state of California to as a psychotherapist. So I am a therapist, and one of my areas of specialization is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I'm a consultant and train other therapists in this intervention, which addresses trauma and other issues where beliefs get wired in a way that are maladaptive. So they may not be true, but they feel true. And those are the kinds of things I work with.
Interesting. So how much of that work that you do now, your professional work, was shaped by your earlier experiences?
I would say that my friendship with Michael Jackson was very much an influence on the career I chose, because he and I, as teenagers, were very focused on opening up orphanages, which of course is not a term that's used anymore, but we were really interested in children at risk. And I went on to become a social worker and worked with children in foster care. And it was very much an inspiration of what Michael and I were working with together, which was a love for children. Even though we were children at the time, we had this shared common interest.
Right. And I've read your book, and you have some pics there of your conversations and your letters to and fro with Michael speaking about this.
Yes.
So it was interesting for me to see that that shared commonality, and what Michael always during his lifetime was always interested and focused on the children, helping them, and yeah. So I could picture that while reading your book. Okay, this stems from early childhood, so and the friendship that you guys had. So
Michael actually gave, I'm sorry to interrupt you, he actually gave me quite a few books about children for our future together. And so they were studies on how to raise children and childhood behavior, all those kinds of issues. And here we were, just teenagers.
absolutely. I mean, that was fascinating for me to just read that.
Mhm.
You know, you got pictures in there of the books that he gave you. So very, very interesting because the book puts everything into perspective. You know, the background, and you look at it. I think a lot of people have said that they look at that era from a different perspective now. What was happening behind the scenes? You know,
Mhm. Right.
so I think that's very interesting to people. Yeah.
Right. But he was truly a philanthropist from his heart and soul, and
Mm.
continued to be one of the, and is still one of the biggest philanthropists in the world.
I totally agree. Yeah, yeah, you could see it. All right, so let's go back a little bit to when you got involved with the witnesses.
Mhm.
How did you become one? What was the influence?
I was around 12, 13 years old, and my family had just gone through a big move from Northern California to Southern California. And I was attending a tough school, a big, tough public school. And I was having a hard time, and my sister and my parents were going through business troubles. They were going through a divorce. The family was very fragmented. And my eldest sister, who 2 years my senior, and I began babysitting for a family in the neighborhood. And the parents of these children that we babysat were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they recruited us slowly. It was a bit of love bombing. We were kids who needed some belonging and some attention and love, and they were brand new Jehovah's Witnesses and really enthusiastic. And their family was warm and inviting, and it felt very different than our home. So I think that was really the attraction.
Right. Interesting that you mentioned love bombing because I think you probably know that, and for the viewers, I think that's one of the identifying marks of a cult or high control religion is to draw people in. You know, that's that love bombing. And did the witnesses feel like a community for you when you got drawn in? I think or more like a set of rules that you had to navigate.
At first, it feels very much like a place where you belong and you're seen, heard, understood. So that sense of attunement that we were receiving was quite, I would say, it formed an attachment. And once that attachment was formed, then the rigidity and the authoritarianism, that is what came on board. But at first, initially, that's not what we were seeing. What we saw was warmth and belonging, and people who really gave us attention that felt meaningful.
Right, right. That's something that always stands out for me is I always say that, there are good people in the witnesses, right? Not
Mhm.
everybody is a bad apple. They are good people. Up
Oh,
until this
yeah.
day, I know good people in there. And that sense of community, and as somebody who's left that organization quite a few years ago, you long for that type of community. When you are out, it's so ingrained in us as human beings that we need community around us. And for a
Absolutely.
lot of people that leave, trying to get that sense of community outside of that environment is so difficult. I'm sure you've come across that type of thing in your practice, in your therapy sessions.
Absolutely. Well, I was fortunate because I wasn't raised in the religion, and my mother especially was very adamantly opposed. And so by the time I went to, well, we'll get into that later, but I wasn't raised in it. So when I left it, even though I had to leave my community that I had been in for 5 years and was had no other community because
Right.
it's so insular, and it's considered, um, it's frowned upon to have worldly friends or people outside of the religion. So it truly was my community, but I also had a family to fall back on that were not Jehovah's Witnesses, and that was very helpful for me. I think that was something not very many Jehovah's Witnesses get when they choose to leave on their own, of their own volition, and then they have no one at all. And I can imagine what kind of social torture that is, because it was social torture for me, and I did have a family.
Yeah, yeah. I can relate because I had my environment was similar. Um, I still had a family that were not Jehovah's Witnesses and were very close. I had a friendship circle at school as well that was very close knit. So as a teenager, I'm battling with the thought of these kids that I'm friends with at school or my family. I don't want to see these people destroyed because they're good people. That's how do I straddle these two worlds? And I can't reject these people. So as a teenager, I'm thinking my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, my friends at school, they're going to die at Armageddon. And that's the
It's just saying that out loud, unless you were a Jehovah's Witness, that concept seems so unbelievable, that there's a group of people who truly believe that everyone outside of their religion will be violently murdered in a war.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's very foreign to a lot of people. I mean, I've spoken to many people, since I've left in my activism and all that. And they are, surprised at what the inner workings are and how Jehovah's Witnesses view everybody else, the outside world, and what's going to happen to them. So, yeah, they are very surprised. Yeah. Yeah. So, Darls, so you're at the school, and Michael Jackson and his family are there. What was the first encounter like? Tell us a little bit about how that came about, that friendship came about with the Jacksons.
Well, first of all, getting into that school was quite special. My sister, the same one who got me into Jehovah's Witnesses, also couldn't handle that I was getting bullied at school. I was getting bullied for not saluting the flag, by the way, and I was sent to the principal's office quite often, which made me a bit of a superstar at the Kingdom Hall, but not at junior high school. So my sister pulled out the phone book, called private schools, and went through a list asking if they would consider allowing us to go to school on scholarship and work in exchange for tuition. And she struck gold when she called Cal Prep School in the San Fernando Valley. And the woman had just opened the school, and she said, yes, please come in and meet me. And we started going to this school, which was at the time a very small school with about 30 students. And then it grew into a much larger private school on a very busy Commerce Street in San Fernando Valley. And it was a modern orange and white building that you could not miss, very attractive from the street. And it started to have a student body of quite a few celebrities and Hollywood, the kids of Hollywood executives. So my sister and I went to this school with very humble, we had a humble origins. And so that's where I met Michael Jackson. He and his siblings, LaToya, Randy, Marlon, and Michael, all started attending school mid-semester. And then Michael was in an art class with my sister. He learned that we were Jehovah's Witnesses. He asked my sister to study the Bible with him. And she said, no, you should ask my sister because she is more knowledgeable about the scriptures and more studious. And that's how Michael and I began studying the Bible together.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So what was we all knew, well, at the time Michael was, part of the Jacksons 5 and their stardom was already there. But, you give us insight in your book as to what Michael was like as a kid, without separate the fame and the stardom at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about, his demeanor, your conversations, what he was like? Yeah.
What he was like in private was very different than what he was like in a crowd or around other people. He was very shy, which I believe is known about him, but I mean really shy. And his interests were quite varied. Michael was a big reader. He loved anything to do with nature, animation, art. He sketched all the time. Um, I think people would be surprised that he was not only a musical genius, but he was also quite an intellectual and very well read. So we talked about books quite a bit. And he also, and I think this is something that might surprise people, is he really wanted to be treated like just another kid.
Right, right. I think, yeah. And that sentence right there, because that's come across in a lot of his, if you see all the interviews and stuff like that from his childhood and when he spoke about it as an adult, that was all he wanted. I mean, he made a song, "Have You Seen My Childhood?" And he just really wanted to be a normal kid and be treated as one. Um,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So that's quite a sad part of him losing, his childhood basically, and not experiencing a genuine childhood. So there was this extraordinary phase for you where you straddling the Jehovah's Witnesses, and you are caught up in and amongst around uh, celebrities and sons and daughters of celebrities at the school. So that conflict and must have been hard at times because of the Jehovah's Witness indoctrination.
It was, but I was already sort of an outsider by being a Jehovah's
Right.
Witness. So being the kid who came on the public bus when other kids came with chauffeurs or drove their own Porsches, yes, I was definitely different than those kids too.
Yeah. 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 So there's an interesting story in the book that you relay about, and this is where the institutional machinery actually gets exposed in the book about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's where the elders approached you to speak to Michael about his appearance or his hair, right? Because this was the 70s, late 70s, early 70s, late 70s. And that was fascinating to me because they approached you and didn't do it directly to him. What was that like to you in terms of them asking you to approach Michael to speak about his appearance and his hair and all of that?
Well, it was very upsetting for me because Michael
Mhm.
had a whole team of people, and his mother also attended the same Kingdom Hall. So I thought it was unusual that they would approach a 15-year-old girl about a 16-year-old's hair. He had a very large afro at the time, and we started
Right.
going door to door. And so they approached me and asked me to talk to him about the length of his hair. And I never did, by the way, talk to him about
Yeah.
it. What I did was
Yeah.
I called his mother and LaToya, who also was my best friend, and LaToya and mother, Catherine, and I talked about it, and they were both very upset that the elders approached me.
Mm.
And for some reason, the issue just disappeared. I think they must have had many meetings in the back room and decided it wasn't worth it. Obviously, there was some fear because they approached me as opposed
Right.
to going directly to him or to his mother.
Yeah, that just showed me, the cowardice of these people. Why would you approach a 15-year-old to talk? Why did you approach them directly? His mother is right there. The family's right
Mhm.
there. So that just shows you that yes, there was a sense of fear, probably in terms of we don't want to upset the apple cart here, because I'm sure the Jacksons were contributing quite a lot of money to the organization and to the congregation. Um,
I know they were. I watched Catherine very lovingly put envelopes in that collection center in the back of the Kingdom Hall.
do you think that that confrontation amongst others was part of um, your outlook on how you saw the organization, was part of the change? because a lot of people, ask me, what was the one thing that made you leave the organization? I always tell people, there's never just one thing.
Yeah.
It's a series of alarm bells that go off that you put in the back of your mind, but it's always there. And then it reaches a point where, all this being suppressed and it just overflows. So you think that was one of your, do you think that was one of your alarm bells that went off for you?
I believe so, Robin. That was probably the first crack in the veneer. And, but even before that, my mother, who was adamantly opposed to it, often called it a cult. And that never left me. It was something that I registered and kept filed away. And then when I started the school, Cal Prep, the owner of the school, who was a lovely entrepreneur and a big influence on me, and I spent a lot of time with her, she often called it a cult. So that sort of was there in the back of my mind at all times. Am I in a cult? And I dismissed it. And I went to the elders with questions, and I was able to explain that away, but it was always there.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to get to the next stage where, according to LaToya's own autobiography, you were eventually disfellowshipped, right, for asking questions. So put us in the picture on that incident where you approached the elders and what transpired. What was what were your questions and what the outcome was?
Well, I started attending university, and I believe that contributed quite a bit to my developing the questions. And Jehovah's Witnesses, as you know, are not encouraged to go to higher education. And because I was so young, I didn't have a choice. I graduated high school when I was 15. I turned 16 that summer. So I started attending university, and it was at university that I learned about this subject called religious studies. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I went to the library and sat on a stool reading books from the shelves of the religious studies section. And that filled me with questions. And I really got a sense of the history of religion and how Jehovah's Witnesses was just one perspective. And I don't know why that never really struck me before, but sitting in this massive library on the 4th floor, I realized that I had been in a very small world of religion. So my questions were very much about, there was this idea that the end of the world, Armageddon, would not occur until everyone had been witnessed to. And I found that concept very difficult to believe because there were cultures that had never even been reached by civilization in the Amazon. And I realized that was an impossible feat to witness to everybody. And somebody who was maybe raised a Muslim or a Buddhist would have no sense of understanding a Christian religion. So when I realized how vast religions were in the world, many questions started to arise. But Robin, this also was post 1975. And I think many Jehovah's Witnesses now don't realize that in the 1970s, the literature pointed to 1975 as the date of Armageddon. And so when 1975 came and went, the doctrine changed with that. And that was very disconcerting for me, especially as someone who really loved books and history and researching. That seemed wrong, that they could just change the facts.
Right. I'm glad you touched on that subject of 1975 because in your book you actually, you give quite a detailed explanation of what it meant to witnesses at the time in 1970, the 1975 date, and how that subtly, disappeared after 1975, 1976 came. And we all know, looking back now, there's been reports of That was a time in the Jehovah's Witness organization's life where a lot of people left because of that. There was a massive exodus
Yes.
because of that date. Yeah, as you say, a lot of people don't know that about the organization. 1975 was such a pivotal year, you know, for many Jehovah's Witnesses and for people who actually left the organization. Because a lot of people have given up their life savings. They sold their cars, their houses. You were in that era where this was done. So, yeah. So you eventually had these questions, and you approached. So, did you approach the elders with these
I did.
questions?
I approached the elders. The elders also approached me because Michael and I were talking quite a bit about my questions, and our phone calls would go on for hours into the evening where we would discuss the literature and some of the hypocrisy or discrepancies. And then Michael was bringing these questions also to elders. So I was causing quite a problem, and the ripple was going further than I was really aware of.
Yeah, yeah. And that's interesting because well, basically the question, we all know that asking questions in Jehovah's Witness organization is a big no-no. Everything that the governing body says is law. And you get labeled an apostate, for asking questions, and you're not spiritual enough, blah, blah, blah. But you eventually got disfellowshipped, and was it Reeby's husband that made the announcement?
It was.
At the Yeah,
Yes.
Nathaniel Brown, I think it was. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. So, and then because I was correlating that to what LaToya mentioned in her autobiography, and it all just came together. She mentions that part of the journey as well in her book. And then when I read yours, it just all made sense. Okay, this is how it happened. So you lost Michael and LaToya and the congregation overnight, of course. We all know that. But I think in your book you write that there was a time when a few weeks later that you got a call from LaToya. And yeah. So tell us about that, because you thought you were going to be cut off.
Well, I didn't know I was going to get disfellowshipped. I knew that I was deemed apostate, and I chose to separate myself from the religion. And I wrote a letter to the governing body, and I asked them to remove my publisher's card, which is the little card that says no blood transfusions,
Right.
and that you're a baptized Jehovah's Witness. And I have an image of that in the book. But when I wrote that letter, I thought, and I said in my letter, I have done nothing. I've done nothing that I haven't broken any of the rules. In other words, usually teenagers are disfellowshipped for sexual misconduct or something like that. But I hadn't done anything. So I wrote a letter pretty much asking them not to disfellowship me. But because I removed myself and I was no longer going to the Kingdom Hall, I didn't know that I had been disfellowshipped. It was when another Jehovah's Witness, also one of my Bible studies, and someone from our school came into my work. I was working at a restaurant and was asking questions to people that work there. If I smoked, if I was dating boys, lots of questions about my behavior. And so I called her and I said, why are you coming into my work and asking questions about me? Just ask me. And she said, I don't have to talk to you. You're disfellowshipped. And that is when I learned, is from that phone call.
Wow. So you were totally blindsided by this. You had no idea this has happened.
I was trying to avoid that, because
yeah,
to have your name announced from the podium for conduct unbecoming a Christian is pretty much is a reputation suicide. And I did not want to leave that way. I wanted to leave with my dignity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a similar journey I experienced, where I wanted to just fade away.
Exactly.
But and however, I had written my first manuscript, and this got published, and this got into the media, and of course the elders hunted me down. Yeah, they hunted me down. So, and then I got, yeah. But I threatened them because at the time, I was so mad that they had hunted me down because I had moved house, and nobody of the Jehovah's Witnesses knew where I'd moved to without
That's
them.
scary, Robin.
Yeah. And I eventually decided to write a similar a letter to them, threatening them with, if you make the announcement from the podium, this is going to happen. Because there are instances where Jehovah's Witnesses have sued elders in their personal capacity for slander or libel, and I explained the whole thing to them. But yeah. So you get disfellowshipped and you lose contact. And what was interesting to me was that even though you were now disfellowshipped, the official announcement was made, the Jacksons never seemed to shun you completely, and that was, yeah, which to me was so heartwarming to see, because I think you said LaToya reached out to you 2 weeks later to the announcement. Tell us about that conversation and what transpired after that in terms of you going to the house again.
Well, LaToya called and said that she and Mother, Catherine, had decided that if we were discreet, that Michael, LaToya, and I could maintain our friendship. And that it was such a beautiful friendship, and that would be no reason for it to end. So we did. We continued to go to the movies and go out to eat, and without being under the scrutiny of the eyes of the elders or the Kingdom Hall. We had to keep it from her sister and brother-in-law, who were devout Jehovah's Witnesses, Reby and Nathaniel, which I think was hard for them because they're such a loyal family. And I'm sure that was a dilemma, especially I think for Michael.
Yeah.
Because he was getting stronger in his faith at the time.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Because I could read into that, right, when you wrote the book, because you could see how he was really committed to it. Yeah. And he wanted to, he was all in, and wanted to make sense of everything. And it's beautifully put in the book. And if you look at my video, I eventually explained what happened later on, the whole thriller incident and all that. So yeah. So and what a lot of people don't know, the song "She's Out of My Life," because you mentioned how LaToya actually spoke about that he was recording Off the Wall at the time. And I think you just you've just gotten married or something like that the first time. And she actually said to you that Michael keeps breaking down at the recording of "She's Out of My Life." And, I think a lot of people, it starts making sense now because of the friendship and possibly a romantic interest that was developing between you two. Would you say that?
It was very hard for me to admit that to myself at the time.
Yeah.
And it was very hard for me to ever take in that when he broke up in the song and was weepy, that it could possibly be about me. But that is what I was told. And it does make sense because we were such close friends and that friendship was severed. And so I really was out of his life.
Yeah. Yeah. And Michael is such a, we all know he was such a beautiful soul in terms of, what his personality and all that. So that makes sense. That really does make sense. So you were disfellowshipped. You still kept the friendship with the family, although secretly, meeting in secret and going on these drives that you explained. When did you realize in your personal and your life after this, that your personal experience with this high control group was actually training for helping other people? Could be training for helping other people? When did you actually start realizing this and go into that direction?
That was many years later when having a private practice, I noticed that many people coming in for various issues, whatever they might be, a relationship that was in trouble or something happening at work, that oftentimes the struggle, what was underneath it, was a current of some type of belief that got registered from an early religious experience. Now, not that religion is bad. That's not at all what I saw. But what I saw was there were examples of spiritual abuse or religious harm. And I could see that that was the true issue as opposed to what somebody was saying was the problem. For instance, oftentimes religion can infiltrate a person's sense of self. And instead of thinking I did a bad thing, it is I am a bad person. So it's those kind of beliefs that get stuck with people's sense of their identity. And I saw a lot of people struggling with the religion of Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, and even those raised in very strict Catholic upbringings. And also, Robin, there's high control systems that are not religious, right? There's families with an abusive authoritarian figure, and the whole family revolves around that. And there's abuse and secrecy, and also it's very cult-like. And I started to see these patterns of high control systems and what that does to a person's sense of beliefs about themselves and about the world. And because of being an EMDR therapist, I work with cognitions or thoughts a person has about themselves that are intrinsic, that sometimes are not really serving them any longer.
Right, right. That's a very interesting point because, I mean, we had a chat about this off camera a few days ago, about people that come into therapy and they don't realize that the underlying issue was spiritual abuse and it is religious trauma that, has now come to the surface. So, and I think a lot of people do not realize that. And it takes, people like yourselves and who are trained in this type of therapy and analysis, to bring that to the fore, because it's not a hard thing to recognize. It's such a hard thing to recognize how many religions, as you say, not all of them do this, but shape your identity and completely rewire the brain. I've read a lot of books by Steve Hassan and other cult experts as well.
Right.
And
the fight model, which is quite
yes.
useful.
Yeah. I'll use the fight model in terms of, when I speak to people about identifying those authoritarian traits of organization, be it religious or commercial or whatever it may be, political, so yeah, very good. So eventually, you've said that high control, as we said, can shape identity, silence, intuition, creativity as well. For people who've been in the inside. So the memoir, Darls, is drawn from your actual experiences, right?
Yes, and from journals that I kept over the years.
Right. So yeah, which is very interesting because you've got things in there way back from the 70s, and I'm thinking you've kept quite a bit of things to, as proof. Well, you didn't know this was going to happen.
I did not know that my journals would later inform all of this, but they turned out to be quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who picks up Finding the Truth with Michael, what do you hope stays with them, after they've read this, a memoir of yours? What do you want people to get out of that?
I would like them to honor any internal thought, feeling, or sensation that would question an authority. And if that comes up, to listen to that inner voice and to allow that inner voice to become externalized, and trust. Trust if that voice is there and there is a suspicion or doubt, to listen to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I must admit that, I think I've read many ex-Jehovah's Witness and other former cult members' books, but yours has got a unique, uh, 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 um, such a unique story to it because it's intertwined with the Jacksons, Michael Jackson, and the conflict with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that it brings it all together. For those people who do not understand how this organization impacts people's lives, it's a very good, even celebrity lives, so-called celebrity lives. But it's such a good example of how this organization impacts people's lives from all walks of life. And in that sense, but it's also a memoir of finding your voice, finding your freedom, and following your own path.
Yeah. Everyone is vulnerable to the impact of cults.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
need to raise awareness.
Oh, for sure. And I think, thank you for the work that you do in terms of raising the awareness, like many others, but especially people like you who are actually trained in helping people through this, the trauma that they've experienced, and for your activism. So, it takes a lot of courage for a lot of people to do that, to leave organizations, and they are left with scars.
Yeah, very much so. And Robin, my hope is, my next project is, I'm right now developing a manual and trainings for therapists to work with spiritual abuse, religious harm, and also identifying adverse religious experiences. What counts as an adverse religious experience? So if anyone is interested, they can go to my website, Finding Truth with Michael, and download a free workbook. If they feel as though they have had any interaction with religious harm, there is a workbook for them. And I plan to provide even more offerings, mostly for therapists who work with these issues, because I don't feel as though there's enough information out there. And I work with quite a few therapists and supervise and consult with them around these issues.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Darls. I think that's a very important point before we close off, because, just from my experience, and I think we've spoken about this off camera as well, where, we wanted to do something similar in South Africa, get psychologists and therapists involved in treating religious trauma. However, a family member of mine who is a psychologist said, you're going to need to train these people on, this whole phenomenon. Because don't think because you're a therapist, a normal psychological therapist, that they understand religious trauma, because it's a totally different ball game. And that was eye-opening to me, because yes, when you do psychology, because my daughter also went to on to study psychology, but that aspect of it, you need to be trained and explain to people, train them what it is, what is religious trauma, how it affects people's lives,
how to identify it.
Right. So I'm glad you brought that point out. So what I will do for the viewers is I will link your website in the show notes, and people can go on there and have a look. And where else can we find people find your book, Darls?
It's sold where all booksellers. It's on Kindle, so it's an e-reader. It's also an audio book that I narrated, and then there is a paperback copy that can be ordered through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or wherever you like to buy your books.
Fantastic. I'll also just link all of those
Okay.
resources in the show notes. Darls Centola, it was a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm glad we could connect and do this. I think it is important, um, as a resource for people, and to just get people to know what you do, and how this connects with others in terms of the ex-high control religious groups and religious trauma. I think it's important that we put these resources out there for people to let them know that they are not alone. There is help, So I appreciate you coming on the show and talking and relating to your experiences to us with Michael. Both my daughters are going to be in awe, and just because they can't wait to hear, so I'm going to mention them. Alyssa, she's in South Africa. Um, Alyssa from South Africa, who was a huge Michael Jackson fan growing up because she was in a household that was a huge Jackson fan. And then my stepdaughter, Demille here, who's now going down the rabbit hole. I've seen the movie 4 times, and she's going down that rabbit hole, and she's so excited to just know about the whole background story as well, and the Jehovah's Witness story. So thank you for coming on the show, Darls. I appreciate it. And as I said, we put everything in the show notes, and people can look you up wherever they are.
Thank you, Robin. It was really a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye for now.